the horror they must have felt. I feel sometimes what they felt.
Reggie and Carol Sumner, both in their 60s, bound with duct tape and placed in the trunk of a car.
Knowing what they went through, being buried alive.
When the bodies of her brother and sister-in-law were discovered a week later, the Reverend Jean Clark says part of her own life ended.
Devastated. Devastated. For a month, I couldn't even think straight. I couldn't focus. I cried.
4 assailants, 3 of them sentenced to death. At least until January 2016, when the courts ruled that non-unanimous jury verdicts were unconstitutional and sent those cases back to juries to be re-sentenced.
You hear about some of these crimes, and it really shocks the conscience.
Allison Miller is a death penalty expert who's handled several high-profile cases in Duval County.
Russell Tillis.
A man convicted of dismembering and burying a woman in his backyard.
And I also defended Alan Wade,
who buried the Sumner couple alive. But like 56% of all death penalty defendants in Duval County since 2017, they received life in prison. For years, Duval's reputation as the deadliest county in Florida wasn't a reflection of its murder rate, but also its affinity for the death penalty. But 88% of those verdicts weren't unanimous, and all must be resentenced.
Finding 12 people who are going to agree on anything these days, let alone whether a man lives or dies, seems very unlikely.
Allison Miller says the passage of time itself is a factor.
And they're happening 5, 10, 15, 20 years after the crime. The community, this sense of like, oh my God, this moral reprehensibility, it just dissipates over time.
It was a whole lot easier to get death in Florida before the unanimity requirement.
Chief Assistant Public Defender Al Chipperfield says the flood of do-over cases consumes time and resources.
An experienced lawyer could handle 100 or more run-of-the-mill felony cases in the time it takes to prepare a capital case.
He thinks much of it could be avoided with plea deals.
What's wrong with life without parole?
In fact, the state attorney's office has accepted life instead of death in upwards of 30 cases. But it has gone for death 16 times since unanimous verdicts became the law.
Some crimes are so heinous, atrocious, and cruel that they cry out for the death penalty.
Many of those prosecuted by Homicide Division Chief Alan Mizrahi.
This murder was the worst of the worst.
Jurors not persuaded more than half the time, even in cases where the facts are about as bad as they get.
Most people would agree burying 2 people alive would constitute something that's especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel.
Not only did jurors not agree to sentence Alan Wade to death, they didn't even agree on that description of the crime.
And how they can overturn all this is beyond my comprehension.
For Jean Clark and her family, the process means reliving their most excruciating memory.
Where are they now?
And it's not over.
It's not just one time happening. It happened 4 times in the first trials, and now it's going to happen 3 more times. It's like we're going through it all over again.
The process is so painful, some of her relatives refuse to participate. Clark says she will attend and demand justice for Reggie and Carol. But she admits the Alan Wade verdict makes that prospect even more grim.
After this last one, you know, scenario, open it all up, and for what? What good is it going to do?
Ann Schindler, First Coast News, on your side.